Hello everyone and welcome to another mass session, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Paul Martin, the Executive Director of Strategic Business at EventsAIR. Now EventsAIR is it's an event technology platform that I think has made massive strides in the market over the last couple of years, and they've got some really interesting thought leadership ideas, and they're certainly not without their experience too. So Paul, maybe you could give us a bit of an introduction as to who you are, your experience, and maybe a top line overview of EventsAIR.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here today, Martin. It's really great to be able to share, our views and thoughts with all of you viewers and listeners. So, to give people a view of those who haven't met me, I've been in this space in the events sector for just over 20 years and been an avid part of the events community. Our technology, which is EventsAIR, has been around now for just over 30 years, and we're in our 6th generation. And then just most recently, due to the response to what's occurred with COVID, to try and help event planners get back on their feet and get back to business, we then built OnAir on top of EventsAIR, which is a virtualized conferencing platform, or virtualized and hybrid, which is probably really the real sentiment right now, because we're going into this space that getting people back to business and getting live events back moving again is really important. So this hybrid piece is really going to be the key in the next few months and possibly into the next year.
Yeah, don't doubt it. And that kind of leads me on to my first main question, really. The industry's been forced into digital events over the last 3 months, and it's brought this concept of hybrid events forward for a post-COVID-19 world. I mean, was this perhaps, do you think, the proverbial kick up the backside the industry needed to embrace smarter events? Was hybrid inevitable anyway?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure the industry needed quite a kick in the backside like this. I think this was probably a little severe, but it certainly forced us all to reconsider the meeting options that we may have previously dismissed. I know that certainly I'd been a party to many conversations in the past about whether or not the virtual world was going to erode live attendance, whether it was going to have a significant effect on live meeting revenues and all of those types of things. And I think because of that, it had been something that the meetings industry, the wider meetings industry, had really tried to suppress. So, we then find ourselves where we are now, and given no other option, we had to rethink our positions. And this virtual and hybrid space has become the interim lifeline. Certainly the virtual space right now, we all know the volume of virtual meetings, conferences, and to some extent the sort of lower level webinars that we've all been on over the last little time, which has really kept us all connected, and it has given the meetings industry and event planners something to be able to use to continue to run their businesses on. But no doubt in the short term future, we'll be looking at the challenges, uncertainty, and certainly the global disparity with different countries opening up at different times and so on, and how that's going to affect the live event space. And of course, then the need for this hybrid medium to sit as an overlay on that live event experience. So I think hybrid event solutions are certainly going to enable event planners to cover all the bases and manage all of the mediums simultaneously. But what's important about that is being able to facilitate an interactivity between the attendees of both the audience and also attendee to presenters in both a live and a hybrid world. You're not going to be able to run a live event and have just a virtual event audience as a disconnected element. They're going to have to run very much simultaneously and have interactivity between the two. So I think that's going to be important. It's certainly going to be a challenge, but I think that's where we're going to be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that sort of leads me on to my next question, really. I mean, does anything go, or do we really need to assess the production quality? I mean, I'm already hearing of agencies and production companies setting up things like virtual venues and things like that. Have you seen any good or bad examples?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure that anything goes. I still very firmly believe that successful events, live or digital, require the highest levels of planning and focus and discipline and creativity from event planners. Where production was an important part of a live event, it's now moved to a position of being more important than ever before in a digital space. So historically, we looked at the likes of staging and lighting, all important facets of an engaging live event, but production quality and the creativity of that production quality is now very, very much taking its place in a digital world. So I think, production is definitely going to be more prevalent and more paramount in delivering the virtual event experience. In terms of good experiences, I suppose, or people that are gearing up, we've seen a lot of convention bureaus and certainly also venues starting to put into their environments some sort of broadcast or production facility to be able to help event planners facilitate better quality delivery of content. So yeah, people are already gearing up for that.
You see, I think it's an interesting kind of angle to this is the concept of, commercialisation, if that is a concept. And, the other day on LinkedIn, I posted a message asking for anyone who's been successful in commercialising or generating revenue from a digital event to come forward and tell me, even in private, how many messages have I got? None. I haven't got one. So I'm just kind of curious, really. Have you got any insight on how someone may commercialize a digital event, and what could the potential draw for sponsors be?
Yeah. I think, this is the number one question that so many event planners are asking. And I think the real challenge here is that digital events, digital conferences are being drawn in a parallel against a webinar. And by that psychology, event planners are then struggling to say, well, can I charge for a digital conference as opposed to something that we historically have seen, which is just a free webinar? And I think the answer there is absolutely they can, because a digital conference and a webinar are very, very different animals. And there are many effective ways to be able to generate revenue in a digital event. So aside of the obvious of registrations, exhibition sales, sponsorship opportunities, and we'll talk about what draws a sponsor in just a moment, but we've also seen our customers selling things like one-to-one meetings. Now, historically, one-to-one meetings at large exhibitions is a mainstay, but now selling things like the ability to have bonus meetings. You might have X amount of meetings as part of your standard registration, but you then might actually sell on further meetings at a premium. So we've seen that happening. We've seen them selling session sponsorship. We've seen them selling exposure in gamification environments, sponsorship announcements in that digital arena, and also interval advertising, and there's a whole lot more. But I think one of the things that's really important to then remember about approaching a digital conference is it's quite a paradigm shift psychologically, because it's a little bit less about managing it like we had in a live environment and more about managing a TV broadcast and looking at the way that some of those mediums have actually commercialized themselves over the years, and how we might be able to add on to the areas that we traditionally generated revenue in a live event, and look at how a TV station or broadcaster then generates revenue in their world. That's something we really need to look at. So all of those elements there, definitely there's opportunities. We just need to think a little bit more laterally. The other thing is to then look at how we then draw sponsors in. And I don't really think this changes personally. A sponsor's objective is to reach that audience. And even in a digital environment, we still have the opportunity to do that. One of the things that does stand out for me, though, is that things like a highly designed background or a gamified interface aren't really going to be the hooks that are going to build a lasting connection with attendees. It's more about how do we get the attendees, sponsors, exhibitors, how do we get them to actually engage at a real level like they would do in a live event to be able to create business opportunities. And that's one of the real keys. So I think if you can do that with your platform, then you're certainly going to drive value for your exhibitors and your sponsors.
Yeah, that kind of brings us on to this question of ROI, the return on investment, and have the parameters, do you think, for demonstrating this ROI change forever, considering that the digital engagement can be measured quite accurately and down to a granular level? And I wonder what this means for live events. And I'll just get, my theory is, people are looking at their digital event engagement now and they're amazed by the engagement figures and high audience numbers. I think in part that's because everyone's at home right now and they haven't got much else to do. Is that situation still going to be that way when people are back in their workplaces? I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Mm. Yeah, look, I think on your first point there's no doubt that the virtualization events has certainly removed some of the barriers to attendance and some of those costly barriers, such as, the likes of travel and accommodation and so on. And also the real simplicity of not having to think about the time that you might need to give up. It's simply just a case of it's running for 2 or 3 hours. You can give that 3 hours. There's not all of the knock on around getting there and so on. So I think, that's certainly changed the mentality of the attendees. But in terms of ROI, there's no doubt that it's changed and it will continue to change going forward further still. So we haven't seen the end of those changes. Gauging the outcome levels for live and virtual attendees is going to be very, very different for event planners. We'll need to consider a broader array of deliverables. Whilst the facets of food and venues and those sorts of things were, of course, and are, of course, important to live attendees, these are not going to be as relevant or really relevant at all to a digital attendee. The digital attendee is going to be looking for the ability to access content, to how their participation and interaction is going to flow through to that live event audience and vice versa. It's going to be how do they engage with those at an event when they're actually attending virtually. And then also looking at the delivery formats and are they getting that rich experience that they would have otherwise gotten at the live event. So, there's a whole lot of things that are going to shift. And so the ROIs are really going to have to change. Ultimately, from an event planner's perspective, they're going to be looking at are the outcomes for their clients achieved? And those outcomes for the client are really a trickle down of that attendee experience. So if the attendees, both virtual and live, are both feeling that they're getting the exposure levels, the interaction levels, the networking, the outcomes that they've always gotten, well then potentially it's going to work quite well. But there are going to be different measurements for both of those groups.
Yeah, there's a lot of change on the horizon for sure. Now, I think my last question really, I think COVID-19 is going to be a threat to the events industry for as long as it's around. We really are waiting for a vaccine. But when live events do return, considering the threat still exists, I think it's certain that we are going to need greater control measures to be able to track and trace our delegates. What technology elements should organisers consider here for a really safe, managed conference?
Yeah, and look, this is a really great and responsible question. And if we look back just 12 weeks, we're all thrust into this, and we all then moved into a place of how do we find a way to run events? That was the first question. We're now in this place that as we open back up and we can run events, it's then a case of how do we manage them and comply with all of the regulations and moving regulations, some of which we don't even know what they're going to be yet. So track and trace is certainly the first part of this. And we started thinking about this probably about 4 to 6 weeks ago. And I know certainly in our technology, we've built in and are continuing to build in a whole host of different elements that helps an event planner to easily facilitate the not just the tracking, but then the trace and the notification of the attendees if they have been exposed at any point in time to somebody that is identified as potentially having COVID. So in terms of the mechanisms that you can use, of course, things like registration, session check-ins, there's new technologies with, well, not so new, the beacon technology isn't new, but utilizing that technology in a different way so as that you can actually isolate who went into sessions, who was in certain areas, using those beacons as the identifying mechanism to see where people were and when and for how long, dwell times, all of those sorts of things. So that type of information is absolutely, I think, really on the lips of every technology provider right now. And I think all of us are working very, very hard to then build that next piece in. The part that's going to be a little bit difficult for event planners potentially at the tracing part is the volume of data that this will create for them, because it's fine to be able to capture it, but it's a bit like in the days when we were talking about heat mapping and so on in exhibitions. Great tools, creates a lot of data, and it then creates the question for an event planner of how do they use that and how do they manage that information effectively. So really the question isn't so much about capturing the data, it's about how does your platform then support you in utilizing that data effectively and making sure that although you've tracked where people have gone and you're able to trace it, how do you then get notifications out to people? How do you then get the relevant agencies involved with the right information? That's really probably the key. But you're absolutely right. This is going to be a very, very big part of our event future. And we're all working towards making that as simple as possible right now.
Great stuff. Okay, guys, well, I'm going to let you go, Paul, because I know you're a busy man, especially if you've got to try and save the events industry with all the event tech. Guys, I'm going to put the link to EventsAIR's website in the description of this video. Otherwise, Paul, thank you very much for joining us.